People hear Bobcat and picture claws first. But Zeus didn't arrive in our world as a fearsome predator. He arrived as a tiny, spotted orphan with oversized paws and a thin little body. At first, he was in that fragile stage where warmth matters as much as food, where you don't hold a wild kitten the way you would a pet. You stabilize, you protect, you work quietly, and you do everything you can to keep the animal as wild as possible. But as weeks turned into months, Zeus transformed into a 30-pound giant, powerful, confident, and surprisingly comfortable around people. Stay tuned to watch how a bobcat kitten grows into a giant in 100 days of his life. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The early morning light over the Sierra foothills was unforgivingly bright, the kind of sharp, antiseptic sunshine that exposed every speck of dust on the clinic floor. In the center of the stainless steel examination table sat a cardboard box. It was motionless, silent, and unassuming. But to Thomas, it carried the weight of a life hanging in the balance. Thomas rubbed a hand over his bearded jaw, the friction sounding loud in the quiet room. He had been a wildlife rehabilitator for 30 years. He knew the odds. He knew that silent box usually meant fading kitten. He lifted the flap. Inside, curled into a defensive, trembling sphere of tawny fur, was a creature that seemed to be entirely composed of oversized paws and terrified eyes. This was the patient. A local hiker had found him abandoned near a dry creek bed, dehydrated, covered in fleas, and screaming for a mother who would never return. "All right, let's see what we have," Thomas murmured. His voice was a practiced instrument, low, rumble deep, and devoid of sudden inflections. He reached in with a leather glove. He didn't stroke the animal. One does not pet wildlife. He cupped the kitten firmly to stabilize him. The reaction was immediate. A low, vibrating thrum radiated through the leather. It wasn't a purr. It was a growl. A tiny, high-pitched engine of defiance coming from a body that weighed less than a pound. "Feisty," Thomas noted, checking the skin turgor for dehydration. The skin tented and held. Severe dehydration. "You've got spirit, little one. Now let's see if you have the strength." They named him Zeus. It was a hopeful joke, a name meant for a god of thunder bestowed upon a creature that currently fit in a soup bowl. But looking at the paws, massive shovel-like appendages that looked like they had been borrowed from a mountain lion, Thomas saw the blueprint. Nature had designed this animal for power. The engine just needed fuel. The first 2 weeks were a blur of clinical precision. Rehab is not a Disney movie. It is a series of biological negotiations. Thomas lived in 3-hour cycles. 6 o'clock. Heat the specialized zoological milk replacer to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. 6:10. Stimulate the bowels. Orphans forget how to go. 6:20. Feed. 6:40. Clean. 7 o'clock. Sterilize. Zeus did not drink. He attacked the bottle. He latched on with a desperate two-fisted grip, his ears twitching with every swallow. His eyes, initially blue and unfocused, began to darken, tracking Thomas's movements with an intensity that was unnerving. Most kittens are chaotic. Zeus was calculating. Even at 10 days old, wrapped in a fleece blanket, he possessed a stillness that stopped the breath. He would finish his milk, wipe his mouth with a clumsily large paw, and stare. He was waiting. He was growing. By the 1-month mark, the trembling secret had vanished. In its place stood a creature of chaotic geometry, This is the phase Thomas affectionately called the construction zone. Bobcat kittens do not grow linearly. They grow in frantic, disjointed spurts. One week, Zeus's hind legs shot up, giving him the appearance of a dragster car permanently driving downhill. The next week, his torso lengthened, leaving his head looking comically small. He was moved from the incubator to the nursery run, a secured indoor enclosure lined with soft pine shavings and low-hanging branches. Here, the personality of the giant began to emerge. Enrichment is critical for cognitive development. You cannot just feed a wild animal. You must teach it to solve problems. Thomas introduced the Russell box, a cardboard box filled with dry leaves and hidden treats. A domestic cat would dive in, scattering leaves for joy. Zeus approached it differently. He circled the box. He sniffed the corners. He sat on his haunches, his tufted ears swiveling like radar dishes, listening for the scratch of the hidden prey. Then, with a sudden explosion of kinetic energy, he launched, not at the leaves, but through them, pinning the treat with a precision strike. "He's not playing," Thomas observed to his intern, Sarah. "He's practicing." It was during this phase that the giant rumors began. At 6 weeks, Zeus weighed nearly double the average for his age. His bone density was extraordinary. When he walked across the wooden platforms, it didn't sound like the patter of a kitten. It sounded like the heavy, rhythmic thud-thud-thud of a working dog. But with size came the first major challenge: habituation. Zeus was too calm. When Thomas entered to clean, wearing his ghillie suit, a camouflage suit used to disguise the human form, Zeus didn't hide. He sat on his log and watched. He wasn't aggressive, but he wasn't fearful. He possessed a terrifying confidence. "He's watching us like we're television," Thomas worried. "If he doesn't develop a fear of humans, he can't be released. A 30-pound bobcat that walks up to a picnic table isn't a marvel. It's a tragedy waiting to happen." They ramped up the hazing. They made loud noises. They sprayed water. They tried to be the scary predators. Zeus just blinked, shook the water off his ruff, and went back to grooming his massive paws. He seemed to know the difference between true danger and theater. He respected Thomas, but he refused to fear him. As summer turned to autumn, the nursery became too small. Zeus was 3 months old, 15 pounds, and growing by the day. It was time for the pre-release pen, a 1/4 acre of fenced forest, complete with trees to climb, dens to hide in, and live prey to hunt. This was the crucible. If Zeus couldn't hunt, he couldn't go free. Thomas watched from the blind, binoculars pressed to his eyes. They had released live quail into the enclosure. Zeus lay on a granite outcrop melting into the rock. His coat had shifted from the chaotic spots of infancy to the sophisticated bar and spot camouflage of an adult. He was invisible. A quail fluttered near the base of the rock. Zeus didn't twitch. The quail moved closer. Still nothing. Thomas held his breath. Did he see it? Was he distracted? Then gravity seemed to suspend. Zeus didn't jump. He poured himself off the rock. It was a fluid, liquid motion, a silent gray blur that ended in a cloud of dust and feathers. It was over in a second. Clean, efficient, lethal. He was a master hunter. But the ghost test was failing. A true wild bobcat is a ghost. You shouldn't see it. If you see a bobcat in the wild, it's usually because it made a mistake. Zeus, however, had a habit of supervising. When Thomas came to feed him, tossing whole rats or rabbits over the fence to avoid association, Zeus would trot to the fence line. He would lean his shoulder against the wire, letting out a soft, chuffing sound. It wasn't begging. It was a greeting. "He's socially bonding," Thomas whispered to himself, a pit forming in his stomach. "He sees me as part of his territory. He sees me as a peer." The realization hit Thomas hard on day 120. He was repairing a corner of the fence, his back turned. He felt eyes on him. He turned around. Zeus was 3 feet away, separated only by the mesh. He was sitting tall, his chest broad and white, his black tufted ears standing high. He looked into Thomas's eyes with a profound, intelligent clarity. There was no wild panic. There was only recognition. In that moment, Thomas knew. He could never open the gate. Zeus was too confident, too large, and too comfortable with the two-legged providers. To release him would be to sentence him to death by animal control. Zeus would not be a ghost of the forest. He would be the giant of the sanctuary. Life in sanctuary can be a dull existence for a high-drive predator. Thomas worried about Zeus. The cat was now 25 pounds, a tank of muscle, but he spent his days pacing the perimeter, bored. Enrichment puzzles were solved in seconds. He needed more. Then came the storm, and with the storm came Spark. It was a brutal November gale that knocked out power for 3 days. In the aftermath, a call came from a neighboring county. A barn had collapsed. A mother bobcat had been crushed. One kitten had survived, but barely. Spark was everything Zeus was not. He was 5 months old, nearly the same age as Zeus when he arrived. But he was stunted, weighing only 6 pounds. He was mangy, terrified, and aggressive. He bit the vet. He bit the transfer crate. He was a ball of fury and fear. Thomas had a radical idea. Bobcat males are solitary. In the wild, a subadult male might kill a strange kitten to reduce competition. But Zeus was different. "We need a tutor," Thomas told Dr. Eris. "Spark is too afraid to eat. He needs to see another bobcat functioning. He needs to see that the world isn't ending." "It's risky, Thomas. Zeus is huge. He could snap that kitten's spine with one swat." "I know, but I trust him." They set up the Howdy Gate, a mesh barrier between Zeus's main enclosure and a smaller acclimation pen. Zeus smelled the intruder immediately. He stalked to the gate, his hackles raised, looking like a mythical beast. He was massive, his winter coat fluffing him out to the size of a lynx. Spark, on the other side, hissed and spat, pressing himself into the furthest corner. Zeus stopped. He lowered his head. He sniffed the wire. He watched the terrifying little scrap of fur. And then, the giant sat down. He didn't scream. He didn't attack the wire. He simply lay down, parallel to the fence, exposing his belly, the ultimate sign of trust. He began to make a sound Thomas had never heard him make. A soft, trilling burp, burp, burp. It was a contact call, a mother's call. For 3 days, Zeus refused to leave the fence. He slept there. He ate his food there, pushing the rabbit against the wire as if trying to share it. Slowly, drawn by the warmth and the calm presence of the giant, Spark crept forward. On day 190, Thomas opened the slide between the 2 pens. He stood ready with an air horn and a water hose, his heart hammering against his ribs. Spark bolted out, confused and skittish. He ran straight into Zeus, Zeus stood like a statue. He let the smaller cat sniff his face. He let the smaller cat bat at his whiskers. Then, with agonizing slowness, Zeus lifted one of those shovel-sized paws. He placed it gently on top of Spark's head and licked the kitten's ear. The air horn remained silent. Thomas lowered the hose, his eyes stinging. Zeus wasn't just a failed release. He was a natural-born mentor. The winter became a lesson in contrast. There was Zeus, 30 pounds, calm, regal, the undisputed king of the enclosure. And there was Spark, wild, frantic, learning to be a bobcat by watching the master. Zeus taught Spark how to disembowel a rabbit properly. He taught him that the wind carries secrets if you sit high enough to catch them. He taught him that the humans were to be tolerated but not engaged with. Ironically, by being the tame one, Zeus taught Spark how to be wild. When Thomas approached, Zeus would stand his ground, but he would chuff at Spark, sending the younger cat scurrying into the den. "I will handle the giant hairless ape," Zeus seemed to say. "You go be a ghost." It was a perfect, albeit temporary, ecosystem. Seasons cycled. The oak leaves fell, the snow came and went, and the heat returned. Zeus was now fully adult. He was a spectacle of nature. He weighed 32 pounds. His neck muscles were so thick they dwarfed his head. He had the heavy look of a dominant male, a blocky chest, a swaying, confident gait, and eyes that burned like amber. Spark had grown too. He was sleek, fast, and appropriately terrified of humans. He was ready. The day of Spark's release was a day of mixed emotions. They caught Spark up, a chaotic affair involving nets and swearing, while Zeus watched from his high perch, silent and observant. They took Spark away to a release site 50 miles deep in the national forest. When Thomas returned to the sanctuary that evening, the enclosure felt empty. He walked out to the fence line. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the grass. The air was warm, smelling of drying hay and pine. Zeus was there. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't looking for Spark. He was sitting on the highest platform, his silhouette framed against the dying light. Thomas approached quietly. "He made it, big guy, because of you." Zeus turned his head. He looked at Thomas, and then he looked beyond the fence, toward the darkening tree line where the wild world began. He sniffed the air, tasting the freedom he would never have. But there was no sadness in the posture. There was dignity. Zeus descended the tree, his claws making a rhythmic scritch-scritch on the bark. He walked to the fence, that massive bobtailed giant, and stopped 3 feet from Thomas. He sat. He slowly blinked his eyes. It was a moment of profound communication. In the world of wildlife rehab, you are taught that these animals don't love you. They use you for food. They tolerate you for warmth. But looking at Zeus, Thomas knew the textbooks missed something. This wasn't a pet's love, desperate and needy. This was a king's respect. Zeus had traded his freedom unknowingly for safety. But in doing so, he had become something more than just a bobcat. He had become a bridge. He was the reason Spark was free. He would be the reason thousands of visitors would learn to respect, not shoot, his kind. "You're a good boy, Zeus," Thomas whispered, his voice cracking slightly in the warm dusk air. Zeus didn't purr. He didn't rub against the wire. He simply held the gaze, golden and unblinking, accepting the tribute. Then, with a twitch of his ear tufts, the giant turned and walked silently back into the shadows of his kingdom, a wild heart beating contentedly within the cage, protecting the memory of the wildness he had passed on.